Hi, my name is Gordy Hogue, and this is Community Connection. Each of us have stories that help us understand each other and help to bring our community closer together. I have been very fortunate to have met many interesting people who've had a positive, profound impact on our community and far beyond. People who've had incredible life experiences and fascinating stories. Community Connections is about these people and about their stories. I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting these amazing people as much as I have. Thank you. Please enjoy. Welcome to Community Connections. My name is Gordy Hogue, and today's guest is a man who has a real passion for social justice. And that passion led him to work as a human rights investigator and later as a senior executive with the Government of Canada. That passion has also motivated his work towards inclusive communities, dating back to the mid-1970s and his work with the neighborhood action projects. And he continues today to volunteer in our community and work on a number of community boards. Welcome, Ajit Mehat. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Gordy. Good to be here with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you as a guest and to be able to talk about the many contributions you've made in terms of helping our community and indeed our country understand how important the values of Canada are and reflected in the type of work that you've done. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and how you moved into Canada and into this type of work?
Well, Gordy, I was born in India, so on the other side of the earth. And I was 10 years old when my family came to Canada. But the story of our migration really starts further back than that. My maternal grandfather came to Canada in 1907. If you can imagine that. And to do that, he and his 14, 15-year-old buddy, the two of them were mid-teenagers, trekked overland from India to Europe, to Germany, and from Germany to England, and then from England, they made their way to Canada and eventually to the West Coast. And so I guess my journey really begins with him. And it wasn't an easy journey for him, as it wasn't for a number of other pioneers. All the difficulties of immigration policies at the time, but eventually he was able to raise a family in India. And eventually bring his sons over, my uncles, my maternal uncles, and they were pioneers here. One of them settled, in fact, in the Ocean Park area and became a teacher and then a vice principal and a principal. And he's the only surviving member of the four brothers that I look up to, because they really personified values of perseverance, adventure, at the same time as family, because they looked after trying to bring us over many, many years later. So I grew up in what's today is called 40th Avenue and 152nd Street. In the old days, we would call it Johnston Road and Mud Bay. Yeah. Or as some people would know that area as the Flats. So my father eventually bought a 20-acre plot of land there, and with mixed results, tried farming for a number of years. And of course, in the meantime, because we were settling in and everybody needed to pitch in, all the kids, including my sister at age 7, we were working in the berry fields, picking berries every summer. And I guess that gave us a bit of an incentive to really attend school and try to be good at school, because we enjoy school so much compared with the summers in the berry fields. And so that's how we managed to help each other, making a contribution as best we could. So I went to school at Lower Tweedsmuir, eventually at Lower Tweedsmuir, and I absolutely loved it. It was one of the best times of my life. People were great. We were a small school, good community, and it gave me a chance to to explore a whole bunch of areas, including public speaking. And so I was able to, through a contest that was sponsored by the Fraser Valley Milk Producers Association, to end up being the BC representative at the annual Peace Arch ceremony, where we would have Americans and Canadians getting together to celebrate that peaceful border. And so I delivered a speech in, I think it was about 1966, along with my American counterpart. My topic was, of course, it was topical of at the time, the Vietnam War, and urging peace and reconciliation. So I guess that sense has always been a part of who I am. I graduated from Lord Tweedsmuir, and then went to UBC. I did my BA in psychology and economics and geography, and eventually trained as a teacher. But in the meantime, I got married, and so was in the, looking to raise a family. I trained as a teacher the following, after getting my Bachelor of Arts, but the province wasn't hiring. And so I applied for a number of jobs, including with the federal government. They were hiring management trainees. And so I was successful in a group of 40 that we were hired from across the country. And that led me to Ottawa for the first time. And so that started my kind of career with the federal government. But I came back because community was back here and my family was back here. And when I came back after a year in Ottawa, I found that Surrey had changed quite considerably. For some reason, and I'll leave that to those with sociology as their background to try to sort out. The Indo-Canadian community, or the South Asian community, as we would call it today, became the target of racist hatred. Windows were being broken of houses owned by South Asians, including my own windows. And so the choice was, do I kind of sit by the wayside and let others try to do something about this? Or do I make a contribution in some way? And so I teamed up with an old professor of mine, Jack Kehoe from UBC, my methods teacher for my teaching certificate. And we came up with a program that would allow neighbors to come to help of their neighbors, the ones who are being victimized. And this hadn't been done before. We had no idea how to approach it. I mean, we had an idea how to approach it, but it was sort of a new project, and we weren't sure the kind of response we were going to get from the community. So we enlisted all manner of people who were similarly motivated and had similar kinds of values. A number of not-for-profit organizations, the Lions, the Rotarians, and political leaders from different political perspectives, church members of the church, leaders in the church and the faith community. And so we organized a meeting at which the community members themselves were made aware of what was happening to their neighbors. And they were asked to come up with, hey, can we devise a solution here? But the solution isn't going to be imposed. It has to come from you as community members. And those are the most durable solutions. That's been my experience, the ones that really come from people who are committed to doing something right and have the energy to put behind it. So they came up with all kinds of ideas, some small, some big. I remember there was an elderly lady, I guess today she wouldn't look elderly to me, but she said, I didn't realize this was happening with my neighbors, but maybe what I can do is the only thing I can do, she said she was a widow, is I can leave my porch light on, and maybe that'll help sort of, deter somebody from vandalizing my neighbor's house. Well, perfectly good solution, right? Perfectly good contribution. So that project was well, I say mine, but also that of my late wife, contribution to try to do something in our own local community. And eventually, that project was taken up by the BC Civil Liberties Association, and it was used in Williams Lake, because there were similar issues happening in Williams Lake. So that's kind of my beginnings, both on the federal track in terms of my career, but also in terms of social justice issues.
So you described your grandfather and his journey through a number of countries, to Canada and then back to India. How is it that he ended up choosing Canada and the west coast of Canada? Was there something unique about that in the many experiences he had?
I think there were stories that he had heard. This is following the Queen Victoria's Jubilee, and some Indian officers or Indian soldiers who had attended the Jubilee and were going back through Canada. I'm not sure what the exact trajectory of that messaging was, but messages got back to India, obviously. And they were British subjects. My grandfather was a British subject, so he had the minimum amount of documentation that allowed him to. And they were, and he was in his mid-teens or sort of, late teens. So the sense, I think, of adventure was probably something that was really important.
That's a great story. So we've moved on up to you going back in Surrey, and you developed that program.
Yes, yeah. And so that program was an intervention in areas of where there was all kinds of very hostile views being held. And so I think the fact that it was successful in the sense of it got community engagement, and from what the RCMP of the day told us, it had a meaningful effect in terms of preventing some of the hatred. Now, that didn't go away. That animosity didn't go away. It persisted, and as we know, there's still echoes of it from time to time. So that was on the community side, and at the same time as that was happening, the NDP government of the day had brought into effect legislation, the Human Rights Code of British Columbia, which, by the way, as lawyers and sociologists have analyzed, was one of the most interesting and progressive pieces of legislation on human rights. And so the commission, the Human Rights Commission representatives, approached me to see if I would like to be trained as an investigator. And of course, I was working at that time as a personnel administrator with Health and Welfare Canada, as it used to be called in those days. And since I had been given leave by my regional director to engage in this project, and since the project was gaining traction, and obviously I wanted to continue my work in social justice on trying to develop more inclusive communities, it was a natural fit for me to make that jump from the federal government to become a human rights investigator. And so for the next 5 years, I worked as an investigator, and we helped, Gordy, we helped pioneer through the work of everybody involved some of the precedents with respect to human rights laws and human rights cases. And one of the interesting things about that law was the piece on employment. The prohibition of discrimination on employment said, no discrimination unless reasonable cause exists. And then for greater certainty, it listed a whole number prohibited grounds. So we were able to take that where it said no discrimination on a risk unless reasonable cause exists, to interpret it to include protection for gays, lesbians, the LGBTQ community. I mean, we didn't have all of those segments identified at that time, and that was upheld by tribunals and the court that was the right kind of interpretation. So it was a very progressive approach. Well, after 5 years working as an investigator, and of course, all kinds of interesting times and stories, because there was a lot of animus against human rights. And so there would be times when I would be receiving threats at home for investigating certain kinds of complaints. But the compelling nature of the work that we were doing was the overriding piece that kept me going in that. And then 5 years later, the Canadian Human Rights Commission the federal government brought human rights legislation into effect. And so I was recruited by them to work on investigating and resolving complaints of discrimination.
Was a lot of the work that you're doing provincially, was that a sort of a foundation, or some of the values reflected in that become reflected in the federal legislation as that came in?
Absolutely, absolutely. So here's an example of where to some degree, it's like our healthcare system, right? Developed in Saskatchewan, yeah, and then federalized. And so the federal government, in the case of human rights, also didn't have experience in how to investigate cases. So they relied heavily on provincial jurisdictions. I guess one could call it raiding. So they raided a bunch of us as investigators. And so because of the similarity of the values, particularly the leader at that time was a gentleman called Gordon Fairweather from Atlantic Canada, from the Maritimes, highly respected on both sides of the aisle in Ottawa. And so it was a natural fit to be able to step into that and carry on.
So that's nice to hear that you were right at the foundation of building those values and having them reflected in legislation provincially, and then being able to be a part of that nationally.
Yes, yeah. The whole notion at the federal level, the whole notion of establishing or interpreting the law to include sexual harassment as a prohibited ground was something that, in conjunction with progressive lawyers in the commission and the commission itself, that we were able to establish through case law. At the same time, it allowed me to travel. I mean, the region, if you can imagine the Western region, I guess this is one of the things when they say that, sometimes Ottawa didn't used to understand what this part of the country looked like. The Western region consisted of BC, Alberta, all of the Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. Wow. Everything serviced out of Vancouver by 3 investigators. Yeah, but it did give me a chance to really also see different parts of Canada. So I went from there, got a promotion as director of the Prairie region, operating out of Winnipeg. For 2 years, I was working in bringing that office up to speed. There had been a number of challenges in there. And then from there, I was recruited by the commission to come to Ottawa to be the director of regional operations for all of the commission across Canada. And so that also gave me a chance to travel. That and successive jobs allowed me to do a lot of travel and find out what this country is about and how diverse it is, and how sort of vibrant it is in different parts of Canada, and the challenges that are faced that are so unique to different regions.
So as you talk about that and being able to interpret that and find the differences, but getting a sense right across Canada today with 2021 and what's happening in the United States, is there anything that that we need to look at that your experience would tell us to be how we can be ever more protective of the values and principles and pluralism and multiculturalism that is so important and so integral to the values and foundations of Canada, which we believe to some degree was in the States, and we're seeing some challenges there now. And are there things that that you've learned through that or that you've experienced that would help inform how we should be moving forward today?
Well, I think overall, just the whole involvement with the endeavor of the federal government, and subsequently in different areas, like when I was with the Department of Justice for 5 years, and with previous to that, with Canadian Heritage, and before that with Secretary of State. I think what it's really done for me is shown me how important our overall framework in Canada is that supports our social safety net, our values that are reflected in programs such as the national healthcare program, and these are all reflections of our values that are different. And I go back to that whole sense of our organizing principle in Canada has always been peace, order, and good government, and good governance, as opposed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So there's that distinction between the individuality. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being self-interested. After all, Adam Smith based his economic theories on that. But I think that whole sense of community that we have is different from the sense of community south of the border. That sense of collective responsibility. Sometimes it hasn't worked out, hasn't been interpreted or translated into actions the way perhaps that would have been more appropriate. We've made mistakes in the past, but at the same time, there's a willingness to learn and a willingness to say that there's the sense of the collective is as important as the individual. So when I see our framework and our programs, both at the federal and the provincial level, I think they reflect that sense of difference, and I'm hoping that that's the glue that's going to hold us together better than the glue that's operating, that's holding our American neighbors together.
So you have tremendous experiences with the federal government, and you've, as you moved from that, you came back to this community, and you've been volunteering and working and maintaining those same sets of values and helping contribute those. Can you talk a little bit about that transition and how you decided to come back to this community and continue to contribute here?
Yeah, well, I think my long-term plan had always been to come back, because family is back here, sense of community is back here. It's not to say that I didn't enjoy my time in Ottawa or in Toronto, where I worked for the Ontario government and as a senior executive, setting up the workplace health and safety agency for them. And I had the whole experience with the federal government, being able to work at the international level and meet some interesting personalities. And I got to tell you, I met Bishop Desmond Tutu, and we had a 15-minute chat at Heathrow while he was coming to look at the situation of the Indigenous people in Winnipeg and Manitoba, and I was coming back from delivering a talk in Edinburgh on our Canadian approach to judicial education. Wonderful chances and a whole number of other ones. But my sense was, my heart was always back here. And so when I eventually decided that I'd served my time with the federal government, and the choice was an easy one to come back here. And at that point, my my daughter was getting married, and so we knew there was going to be, we were hoping, let's put it that way, there were going to be grandkids, and when the grandkids arrived, well, one and then the second one about a year later, that was a really pivotal point in my life as well. Like just the sense of didn't need to be a parent anymore. I needed to spoil them and do the things that finances or other restrictions prevented us from being able to do for our kids. To be able to make a world a little better for them and contribute to that by having some more spare time to volunteer and go from there. So that's how, when I came back, I started working on a volunteer capacity. But just before I started that work, I was approached by UBC because of my background to do an employment systems review, looking at barriers to the employment of women, Aboriginal people, persons with disabilities, and visible minorities. And of course, I counseled them to enlarge that scope, not to the 4 groups that are identified in the Employment Equity Act, but to include LGBTQ community and a whole host of other groupings, just to make sure that, again, there's a more inclusive approach to recruitment, selection, and development of staff and faculty at UBC. And that is extremely energizing work. Yeah. And so after that, I started volunteering, primarily through my current partner. She was the director of development at Semiahmoo House, at the Semiahmoo Foundation. And so that got me involved in volunteering. And eventually from volunteering, I got on a number of different boards, and still am connected with a provincial organization called Board Voice, where I'm acting as a volunteer ambassador to advocate on their behalf and the mission and vision that organization has for strengthening the capacity of volunteer community boards.
So where do you see, given that your experience and the values of Canada, where do you see as our next challenges as we move forward in trying to become a more inclusive and more caring society?
Well, we're living through a pandemic, and of course we're now witnessing the whole rollout of vaccines and immunization. And I think immunization is a good way of looking at what we need to do to protect our way of life, the Canadian way of life, because there is another virus or another infection south of the border, and that's divisiveness and racism. And we're already beginning to see some signs that the expansion of right-wing hate groups in Canada, not to the same extent as they are expanding in the United States. But we, as has been said in the past, we are so closely tied with the United States that we get infected. The old saying that if America sneezes, we get the cold. So I think we need to guard against that erosion. I think we can't be complacent about the goodwill that's been built, and the inclusion and the ability for differences to be expressed. But I think we need to reinvigorate how we look at diversity. We need to make sure that the glue that holds our diversity together, the common goals, the common values, are emphasized, are spoken to, and are operationalized. in both government programs and services and in day-to-day activities of ordinary Canadians. Because if we lose that sense of what holds us together, then I think that's when the erosion starts.
Well, Ajit, your life has been a model and a role model for so many people across Canada, and the contributions that you've made and continue to make in our community are so much appreciated. You've helped make us all a little better, a little more caring, and a little more sensitive. And I'm sure that you'll continue to do that for years and years to come, because of that passion that has led you to where you are today will, I'm sure, continue to be the fire that I see each time I see you, and the passion that you carry forward in terms of how do we make our community, our country, and our world a little more caring and a little more sensitive and a little more inclusive. So thank you so very much for being a guest on Community Connections. It's been a pleasure and a delight talking to you, and the time went so quickly. Thank you for joining us today on Community Connections. Please tune in to our next show as more amazing people share their wonderful stories. If you haven't already, please click on the red subscribe button below, right down there, and view our updates. Feel free to leave any thoughts or comments that you may have. We're always trying to do a better job of connecting this wonderful community. Thanks again for joining, and until next time, keep connecting. Thank you.